It happened somewhere over the Atlantic. My wife and I were going to Iceland. A man a few rows behind us collapsed in obvious medical distress. Now, my wife's a doctor, and so she jumped up and, immediately went to start working with him and was telling the stewardesses, the things that she needed and started an IV and all of that. And I went and I sat down next to the wife, who was obviously panicked and scared and hands trembling. And for a while, I just talked with her. I asked her about her kids and her family, and asked for some relevant information I could relay to my wife. But more than anything, I just wanted to be present as she was feeling helpless and scared. Well, after a little while, I said, "You know what? I'm actually a Free Methodist pastor. Would you like me to pray with you?" And she kind of looked at me and went, "Well, I'm Presbyterian. Is that okay?" And I said, "I'm sure God could handle that." And we kind of laughed a little and then prayed together. And it was beautiful. And as we were doing that, I looked over and I saw my wife, and she was applying every bit of her training to stabilize the man, right? I mean, it was science at work and it was focused and steady. And yet, with me, faith was doing the quiet work too. And it struck me later that we were both doing the same sacred kind of thing, not because it was religious or anything like that, but that my wife's skill in science was helping hold that man's body together, and, well, faith was holding hers together. See, and I think that's what healing looks like when it's whole. Right? That there's two ways of knowing, two ways of seeing the world working together toward the same hope, the same goal, the same purpose. And so here's the question that that moment left me with, and one that I want to start off today's talk with. As Michelle and I go into this. In a field rooted in evidence-based practice like social work, and founded on scientific process, can we truly help people heal if we ignore what gives their life meaning?
That's the question we face often in social work. People are searching for meaning, yet unsure if that part of themselves is welcome in our room. We're the ones that create that neutral, safe space for them to show up fully. This is that space where science and empathy meet.
Michelle's right. In this question that lives at the heart of our work, it's not just philosophical, but it's also deeply practical. I mean, how do we make space for both the measurable and the meaningful in the same room with the same people in the same situation? Well, to help us think about that, Michelle's going to walk us through one of the frameworks for understanding how science and faith can interact.
Ian Barbos, a physicist and theologian, describes four ways people see the relationships between science and faith. He called them conflict, independence, dialogue, and integration. So, of course, in conflict, one side has to be right. So it's either science or faith, never both. In independence, they stay in their own lanes, right? Science talks about facts and faith talks about meaning. And hopefully we can get to dialogue, right? That's where some of the power lies. And that begins when we listen to each other, exploring how evidence and belief can inform one another. They're not in conflict. They're not trying to prove something different. They can be together. And lastly, integration is where they do work together, combining evidence and meaning to understand the whole person, right? This is how we get a holistic view of the clients that we serve or friends, family, anybody. So there's another scientist. He's a theologian, John Polkinghorne, and he built upon that idea. He said science and faith aren't rivals, they're complementary ways of knowing. He compared them to two lenses. One shows us how the world moves, and the other is why it matters. And I really kind of connected to this concept because for me, spirituality isn't about religion, it's about growing into the highest version of ourselves. It means we show up, we support others, and we help one another heal along the way. It's what I think we do. We try to end up to grow and become the best versions of ourselves that we can in this lifetime. And in social work, we use both of these lenses every day, right? Science gives us the structure to act safely and effectively, while meaning provides us with depth. So when we use both of these lenses, science and meaning, we see people truly, fully, and more holistically. It's not just their pain we see, but their possibility. That's the work of healing. That's the holistic work that we get to do as social workers. So, as an Anglican priest and a theoretical physicist, he bridged these two worlds, the scientific community and the Christian faith tradition. He saw creation as open and dynamic and unfolding, shaped by both law and freedom. He created balance in those two meanings. And that balance between evidence and meaning sounds beautiful in theory, right? It should work pretty easy, it would seem. But as Trevor's going to share here with you in just a moment, it's not always easy in practice. Sometimes the bridge between the sciences and faith can feel fragile.
And she's right. I mean, that bridge can feel fragile, crumbly. I mean, in the clinical world, it's often risky to bring up faith, right? Even though it's a core part of how so many people orient in their world. And sometimes it's not like even fear of hostility that's going to keep it out. It's more of just a fear of overstepping, right? Of being misunderstood or being unprofessional. That we want to offer holistic healing, but it's easier to stay rooted in the science and the structures. I mentioned earlier that I'm a pastor, and I got to tell you, when I tell people that, it changes the way they see me. It's the different way that they respond. Being a therapist and evidence-based practice and all of that is rooted in science and it's structural and it's predictable. But man, you get into the spirituality piece and it gets off into opinions and ideas and thoughts. And when that happens, people get a little nervous. And they begin to wonder, like, are you going to make your opinions more important than mine? And so on. But the thing is, our clients don't actually live divided lives. I mean, their hope, their shame, their guilt, their resilience, their need for healing, it's all tied together. And if we only focus on the facts, we miss what makes people actually human. One of those moments was in my mother-in-law's final days. She'd been fighting cancer for quite a while, and it was getting down near the end, and all of us were taking turns sleeping on the floor of the hospital, and we got to know one of the nurses there really well. She was very professional, very capable, and she knew we were getting to the end. And that last day, as my mother-in-law's breath was starting to slow and so on and so forth, the nurse came into the room and said, would it be okay if I just said a prayer? And it was beautiful. I mean, even the atheist members of my family were touched and moved by it. Like she had done all the professional stuff, And then she stopped and she spoke to the spiritual and the human stuff. It was sacred and it was healing. And I think that gives us a little glimpse of what integration looks like when it's lived out, right? Compassion and skill meeting in the same breath.
That hospital moment that Trevor described shows what integration can look like in real life, where compassion and skill meet. In that story, it wasn't about religion, it was about presence. That nurse held space for the grief and comfort at the same time. She didn't preach or overstep. She offered what the moment called for. And in social work, we often ask ourselves how to hold that same kind of space ethically, meaningfully, and with respect for every person's belief system. So, I'm going to introduce you to some bridges that will help us as social workers create that practical bridge. And the first thing we're going to talk about is some structured tools, some evidence mode, or not evidence, but some outcome measures like the FICA and or the HOPE, HOPE. And what that does is it gives us a framework to explore where clients find strength, not just what they believe. They let us invite meaning into the conversation without crossing boundaries. The second component is an integrated care plan, which will help us align evidence-based goals with human goals. It'll reduce anxiety while increasing hope and connection. It's really the plan that makes it come together for the client, right? It's what they need and want in any given moment. It's about healing the person, not the symptoms. It's about creating space. And lastly, which we all have heard many, many times, supervision, self awareness. It helps us manage our own biases. We don't have to share a client's faith to respect it. Sometimes curiosity builds more trust than certainty ever could. And just showing up and being present and listening. That's what that nurse modeled in Trevor's story. It modeled this balance perfectly, clinical excellence paired with compassionate presence.
And what that nurse offered to us so well was connection. Like both connection with herself, but then also connection with something bigger, which gave us a moment of peace in the midst of that. I had a personal experience of that. One of the hardest nights of my life was the night my grandmother died, and there again we were doing a nighttime vigil, and I was there by myself with her, and she had slipped into delirium and felt like she was falling about every 60 seconds. And so I ended up crawling into bed with her, and for the whole night I just laid next to her and held her and reassured her, sang some hymns, and at some point in the early morning she passed. And I remember like looking at all of the IVs and machines and the beeping and the nurses coming in and all of that and thinking, it wasn't enough. The science failed us. And yet, somehow my faith reframed that, gave meaning, those moments, the honor of that time, that space, that love, that presence. And they were doing their work even when a cure couldn't. See, and I realized that what faith had given me wasn't a miracle, it was connection. And that connection was a protection. Research actually supports that idea. I mean, studies show that faith and spirituality often act as protective factors during trauma. helping people make meaning, sustain hope, and recover their balance. And that's what I experienced. And more than that, it also research shows us that the therapeutic alliance, or the connection between the therapist and the person, has, if it is a good, has far more impact than any modality or practice. See, the connection, whether to God or to others, something larger than ourselves, is what keeps us whole when life falls apart. As clinicians, that's our job. I mean, we can know all the science and modalities and the steps in the right ways, but ultimately, can we bring that into connection with the soul of a person and help bring healing?
After Trevor's story about finding faith through loss, I think of someone close to me who walked a very different path. She had always been a spiritual person. Growing up, she kind of, because of her upbringing and the religious component was pretty stifling, she kind of denounced it and moved towards more of a spiritual belief system. That is until her teenage son died of suicide. And in her grief and despair, she turned towards a structured faith community again. And I watched that shift for her. It was very profound, and kind of a space of grace to be in. The unimaginable, navigating that as a parent, it was really painful, honestly, just that she had to go through what she had to go. And I slowly saw her reaching for things that maybe for her, she established when she was younger. Thank goodness that she had it in such a difficult time. And I learned at that moment, really, like, the truth is it wasn't about theology necessarily. It was really about her survival and navigating that situation. She really needed something solid to hold on to, especially when nothing else made sense for her. So, as a social worker, that experience really reminded me that grief often changes how people reach for meaning. And there's times in our lives where sometimes it can expand our faith and sometimes it can reshape it completely. And what I learned is our job just really uh, isn't here to interpret it or fix that. We just create space for it. Whether someone finds grounding in prayer, in community, or in connection, our role is just to meet them there with compassion, curiosity, and empathy. We don't have to fix it. And watching her reminded me that meaning making looks different for everyone. Science may help us understand what happens, but spirituality, whatever that means for each person, helps them live with it.
And so, in that sense, right, we're advocating to hold space for the wholeness of the person. I mean, in our evidence-based practice and in our billing insurances and our all of that, right? We have science that gives us a foundation. It keeps our work ethical and safe, effective, hopefully. Science holds that. And yet at the same time, faith, spirituality gives our work depth. And I really believe that this work we do is sacred. Not in any kind of a religious sense, but that because something special, important happens. And every client that we have, right? I mean, they are made up of both data and information and dreams and hope. Our job is to hold space for both, to be bridge builders between what works and what matters. And when we do that, healing becomes something bigger than treatment, becomes relationships, becomes presence, becomes purpose. it becomes wholeness. Thank you.
Thank you.